Welcome to Through the Bible with Les Feldick, a 30-minute walk through the Scriptures, teaching in-depth Bible truths that change people's lives. Now, here's your host, Les Feldick.
Okay, once again, see everybody back, and you've had your coffee break. And for those of you out on television that are rather new to the program, we always like to periodically let it be known we tape 4 programs in succession here on a Wednesday afternoon. And between each half-hour program, we have a coffee break, and the ladies bring in enough refreshments for a log rolling. So we do. We just have a good afternoon, and we'll be out of here about 4:15, 4:30. Okay, we're in Isaiah as yet. We're going to pick up where we left off because I want to especially come in at verse 20 and 21 and the first part of chapter 60 this half hour. And remember now that in spite of all of Israel's sin, God still puts the prospect of glorious things to come, especially that earthly kingdom. Now, as I've said before, and I'll say it again, most of Christendom, churchgoers, Sunday school people, don't have a clue as to this 1,000-year earthly kingdom coming on the earth. And it's going to be primarily the fulfillment of all these promises made to the nation of Israel, that the end result of everything will be this glorious kingdom over which they will be the primary nation. And we'll be looking at that sometime in the next 2 programs. All right, so even though it's depressing to read about all their sin and their unbelief and their wickedness, yet the prospect is still out in front of them of this glory yet to come. All right, chapter 59 now then, verse 18. According to their deeds, that is, their unlawful, their wicked deeds, accordingly he will repay fury to his adversaries, recompense to his enemies, to the islands or the borders of other nations he will repay and recompense. So now verse 19, so shall they fear the name of the Lord from the west, and his glory from the rising of the sun, which is the east, when the enemy shall come in like a flood, which of course is a reference now to the Babylonians. The Spirit of the Lord shall lift up a standard against him. All right, now we'll leap all the way up in verse 20 to Christ's first advent and the Redeemer. And you see that's capitalized, so it's a title, and it simply means the one who will pay the price for Israel's salvation, and that of course is going to be their Messiah. And so the Redeemer shall come to Zion. And never forget, Zion is Jerusalem. Mount Zion is in Jerusalem. Never forget that. So the Redeemer, the Messiah, will come to Zion, and unto them that turn from transgression in Jacob, saith the Lord. All right. Now, when Christ came then to the nation at his first advent, just like it's been all the way in their history, how many, percentage-wise, how many, not a definite 5 or 10%, but a small number or a great number, how many responded and believed who he was? Just a small percentage. A few. All right, now let's go up again and see how the Apostle Paul even deals with that phenomenon. Again in Romans. Chapter 11. It was only a small percentage of Israel that could understand and believe who Jesus of Nazareth really was. And of course it carries over then into Paul's writings here in Romans 11 as he's dealing with the nation of Israel. In Romans chapter 11, let's just jump in at verse 2, honey. Romans 11, verse 2, because here Paul is showing that even from antiquity and up to his present time, as I said last program, things never change. There was a remnant back then. There's a remnant here. There will be a remnant in the end time scenario. All right? Romans 11, verse 2. God hath not cast away his people which he foreknew. Now that flies in the face of a lot of teaching that's going out today that God was all through with the Jew after 70 AD and that everything promised to Israel has been given to the church. Not according to Romans 11. They have to throw this chapter away, because here it's as plain as day that God has not cast away his people that he knew in his foreknowledge. And now Paul gives a good illustration. Know you not what the Scripture saith of Elijah, and how he maketh intercession to God against Israel, when he said, now watch, if this isn't a true ringer, what we've been reading in Isaiah, even Elijah was already experiencing it. They have killed thy prophets, they have torn down your altars, and I am left alone, and they seek my life. Why were they seeking Elijah's life? Because he was a true man of God, and they didn't like him in their midst. That's been Israel's history. All right, so Paul says, but what saith the answer of God to him, that is, to Elijah? And God said, I have reserved to myself 7,000 men who have not bowed the knee to the image of Baal. Now that was the God in Elijah's day. In Isaiah's day, it was Moloch and some of the others, see? But it's always that same small percentage that did not fall into rank unbelief. Now look at verse 5. Paul writes, even so then at this present time, as he writes, in about 60 AD, just a few years before Rome will come in and destroy the temple and the city. Even so at this present time there is a remnant, that small percentage, see, according to the election of grace. And so, what happened? Verse 7. Israel, the nation, has not obtained that which he seeketh for. Well, now what does that mean? Well, all up through the Old Testament, because of the prophets, they had an understanding that there was a king and a kingdom coming, and that it would be glorious. And in spite of all of those promises, they still would turn their back on it. And so now Paul makes reference to that fact. Israel was looking for a king and a kingdom, but they didn't get it because they wouldn't believe who Jesus was. Now see, that's the whole thrust of Christ's earthly ministry. And again, I guess I can use one of my favorite verses while we're in Romans anyway. Just jump ahead a few pages to chapter 15. Many of you have heard me use this verse. I use it so often on my traveling seminars as an introduction to almost any subject I want to teach for a whole day on. I can start with this verse. Romans 15, verse 8. Most of Christendom doesn't even know it's in their Bible. But it is. It is. Well, verse 8, where Paul says, now I say that Jesus Christ was a minister of the circumcision, that's Israel. And for what purpose? For the truth of God. Now, what was his purpose when he came to the nation in his first advent? To confirm or fulfill or bring to fruition the promises made to the fathers. That says it all. So why did Christ approach the nation of Israel? To proclaim himself as their king, and how he was ready to bring in this glorious kingdom promised all up through the Old Testament. But did they accept it? No. Their unbelief caused them to be blind to even that for which they thought they were looking. Now again, you know, my favorite illustration of that was when they could have had the promised land. They could have gone in and had the land flowing with milk and honey. And when I make these two comparisons, I always ask the question, was he playing games with Israel when he said the land of milk and honey is there? No, it was for real. They could have had it. But why didn't they? Unbelief. Oh, we can't beat those Canaanites. They're too big. Their cities are walled. Where was their faith? They had none. And so they had to turn around and die in the desert. Well, it's the same way at his first advent. Here he made all the fulfillment promises that if they would just believe who he was, they could have had it. But only a few did, just a small, and that wasn't enough because it had to be the whole nation, you see. And so what a sad commentary. But listen, don't just blame Israel. That's the world in general. In fact, I was just talking to someone on the phone yesterday. We are talking about some of these parallel percentages. When 7,000 in Israel didn't bow the knee to Baal, out of a population of 7 million, now most of you have heard me use this before, what was the percentage? 1/10 of 1%, or 1 out of 1,000. That's all. Now look at America today. Even though our churches may be full of raucous worshipers, how many are true believers? How many are resting on that finished work of the cross? Not many. I'm not going to be bold enough to say 1/10 of 1%, although I'd like to. But listen, it's going to be a small percentage. When the Lord comes, they won't even miss us. It won't even make a dent in the population that's missing. And so it was in Israel, see? And here we go again, back to Isaiah. Back to Isaiah now then. Now verse 19. As Isaiah is leaping all the way over the Babylonian invasion, and he's coming all the way up now to his first advent. So shall they fear the name of the Lord from the west, his glory from the east, and when the enemy shall come in like a flood, that of course later was, I think, a reference to Rome, the Spirit of the Lord shall lift up a standard against him. Now then, verse 20, I got behind myself here. The Redeemer shall come to Zion. He's going to come, Isaiah writes, to present himself as the fulfillment of all the Old Testament promises. And it'll only be to those who will turn from transgression, but only a small percentage did, so it wasn't enough. Now verse 21. As for me, this is my covenant with them, that is, believing Israel. My spirit that is upon thee, and my words which I have put in thy mouth shall not depart out of thy mouth, nor out of the mouth of thy seed, nor out of the mouth of thy seed's seed, saith the Lord, from henceforth and forever. Now, when Israel rejected him at his first coming, this won't become fulfilled until when? The second coming. At his second coming now we can expect Israel to come under the fulfillment of what we call the covenant that he makes with Israel. Jeremiah, let's look at it a minute. Jeremiah 31. Jeremiah 31. The new covenant. Not the old covenant of law, but the new covenant which will be ushered in at the advent of the kingdom. Now, of course, when Israel rejected everything at his first coming, this was pushed back 2,000 years, which nothing in Scripture indicates. There's nothing in here to indicate a 2,000-year period between his first advent and his second. It may even be more. We've already come almost to 2,000, according to our calendar anyway. But whatever, it's going to be at his second coming. Jeremiah 31, verse 31. Behold, the days come, saith the Lord, that I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel. Now that has never been made yet, because Israel rejected everything. But when he comes the second time, it will become a reality. Now verse 32. This is what that new covenant is going to be, just like Isaiah foretold in his writing. Not according to the covenant that I made with their fathers in the day that I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt. That was the covenant of law. This is going to supersede the Mosaic covenant of law. And he says, which my covenant they broke, although I was like a husband unto them, saith the Lord. He didn't give up on them any more than a husband will on his unfaithful wife. Now verse 33, but This shall be the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel. After those days, that is, after anything intervening, and he finally comes and sets up his kingdom, this is what's going to happen to every Jew that comes into that kingdom experience. I will put my law in their inward parts, I will write it in their hearts, and I will be their God, and they shall be my people. It's going to be an automatic thing. Now verse 34. They shall teach no more every man his neighbor, and every man his brother, saying, Know the Lord, for they shall all know me. See, there won't be any unbelievers to stick out the tongue in the kingdom. They're all going to be of like mind. See? All right? From the least of them to the greatest of them, saith the Lord, for I will forgive their iniquity, and I will remember their sin no more. That's coming. But until that day, Israel is still plagued with all the things that Isaiah is writing about. Okay, let's come back again then to Isaiah where we just left off. And that would be in now chapter 60. Isaiah chapter 60. And this, of course, is a reference first and foremost to his first coming and the following kingdom if Israel would have accepted it. But they didn't, and so now they've been sent into the dispersion. They've been scattered into the nations of the world. They have now been coming back to their ancient homeland in order to be ready for his second coming. That's no accident that the Jews are back in the Holy Land. It's no accident that they have become a nation of people once again, because they have to be there for the coming of their Messiah. All right, but now we're talking about the first advent. Verse 1, Arise, the prophet writes, Shine, for thy light is come. Whose light? Israel. And who's Israel's light? The Messiah, Jesus of Bethlehem and later on of Nazareth. All right, the glory of the Lord is risen upon thee, the nation of Israel. For behold, the darkness, spiritual darkness, shall cover the earth, and gross darkness the people. Israel, even though they had the temple, they had the priesthood, yet it was nothing but a man-made works religion by the time Christ comes, and they are in a spiritual darkness. But that's not going to stop God. The Lord shall arise upon thee, and his glory shall be seen upon thee. And then, if Israel would have been obedient, and if they would have recognized who Jesus was, and the tribulation would have gone by, the king would have set up his kingdom, and then Israel could have been what? Next verse. And the Gentile shall come to thy light. That was their prospect. But they lost it. They lost that opportunity when they rejected their Messiah. And so now there will be no unsaved Gentiles after Christ sets up his kingdom, because that will have totally changed. Now, just to show you how that Christ knew that Israel was going to reject him and that they would have to wait at least a period of time, it never tells us how long, until he would yet return and give them the king the kingdom. Turn with me to Matthew 23. Because all through his earthly ministry, he gives no indication of Israel's rejection. Even though the vast majority were not becoming followers and believers, yet he did not indicate that there would be a break in the time or in the outflow of Old Testament prophecy. Matthew 23, verse 37. Verses that I'm sure you're all acquainted with. Matthew 23, verse 37. Another couple of verses that I just cherish. Oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem. Can't you hear him? Many of you have seen the painting of Christ sitting on the Mount of Olives, looking out over the city. And this is where I think the painter got the setting. as he sits here and looks out over the city that is now rejecting him out of hand. And this is his heart cry. O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, thou that killest the prophets. They've been doing it for hundreds of years. And you stone them who are sent unto thee. How often, all the way through their history, how often I would have gathered thy children together, even as a hen gathereth her chickens. Now, it's unfortunate in our day and time, very few people know what a phenomenon that is. But I was still raised when I was a kid when we still had the old, as we called, the old cluck hen with her little brood of chicks. And she could just tick, 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 and here they'd all come and hide under her feathers. Just totally disappear. Well, that's exactly the illustration he's drawing. How he would have called Israel under his almighty feathers, as the psalmist put it. I will hide under the feathers of your wing. That was the connotation. The old hen with her brood. And he says, O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, how often I would have gathered thy children together, even as a hen gathereth her chickens under her wings. But what? You would not. Little chicks had brains enough to come running, but Israel wouldn't. Quite an analogy, isn't it? But you would not. You couldn't sense your danger. You couldn't sense the tranquility under my wings. And you rejected me out of hand. All right, now then, here's where I think he has an indication that Israel is going to reject him, and all the promises are going to fall through the cracks until a later time. So he says in verse 38, behold, your house is left unto you, what? Desolate. For I say unto you, now here comes the indication. Now nobody understood this. The 12 didn't grasp it. They thought everything was going to keep right on coming, and he would yet set up his kingdom. But the Lord knew. And he says, I say unto you, you shall not see me henceforth until, so he's still coming, but it's going to be at a later time, until you shall say, that is, Israel as a nation, blessed is he that cometh in the name of the Lord. And that, of course, will be at his second coming. All right, now let's back up into the Old Testament and stop at Zechariah, which is just ahead of Malachi. So come out of Matthew, go back through Malachi, and there sits Zechariah. And drop in with me into chapter 12 and verse 10. Now this is prophecy, and it fits right in with what the Lord said in Matthew 23. Zechariah chapter 12, verse 10. And God, speaking through the prophet, says, I will pour upon the house of David and upon the inhabitants of Jerusalem the spirit of grace and supplication, and they, the nation of Israel now, they shall look upon me whom they have pierced, and they shall mourn for him as one mourneth for his only son. In other words, when they're reunited. Not a mourning of death and losing that son, but a renewed acquaintance, like Joseph and his brethren wept on one another's neck, not because they were losing, but because they were being reunited. All right, and then he reads on, and shall be in bitterness for him as one that is in bitterness for his firstborn. All right, now the next one then is over in chapter 13, and drop down to verse 6. Now see, all of this prophetically showed that Christ would suffer and die, and then yet set up his kingdom. All right, Zechariah 13, verse 6. And one shall say unto him, that is, at his second coming, after he has made himself available to the population, one shall say unto him, what are these wounds in thy hands? Now what does that tell you? When he returns in that resurrected body, what's going to be the evidence of his suffering? Nail prints in his hands. He's coming back physically and visibly in that same body with which he ascended in Acts chapter 1. And here's the proof of it. Prophetically, they're going to say when he returns, "What are these wounds in your hands?" And he will answer, "Those with which I was wounded in the house of my friends." Well, who were his friends? Israel. See? It's all so obvious. All right, we've only got 2 minutes left. We've got to hurry. Come back to Isaiah chapter 60. Now verse 3. Isaiah 60, verse 3. "And the Gentiles shall come to thy light." Now see, I hope you've gathered in all of our studies over the years, God never instructed Israel to evangelize the Gentiles. Never. Jonah was the lone exception. He was sent to Nineveh. That was all. And that was for fulfilling a type. But nevertheless, we always like to make it plain and simple that Israel only had one requirement from their God: to be obedient to the Noahic law and the system of law and temple worship, and take it all by faith and look forward to this coming glorious King and his kingdom. That's all Israel was expected to know. They knew nothing of a crucifixion. They knew nothing of a death, burial, and resurrection, and God didn't expect them to. But they were to believe what God was telling them, and they would not. See? They refused it. All right, now if they would have accepted that king and the kingdom, they could have evangelized the whole world. That was the prospect. Because Exodus 19, God said every Jew would be a priest or a go-between. But when they rejected the king and the kingdom, they lost that opportunity of evangelizing the Gentile world. Because there will be no lost Gentiles in the kingdom now. That's a no-no. Because the Lord himself said, except a man be born again, he cannot see or enter the kingdom of heaven. But in the Old Testament prophecies, that was Israel's possibility of being the light to the Gentile world under the kingship of their Redeemer and their Messiah. But when they rejected him, they lost it all, at least for a couple thousand years.
Thank you for watching Through the Bible with Les Feldick. Through the Bible is a partner-supported ministry. If this program has been a help to your study of the Scriptures and you'd like to see others enjoy the teaching, your support would be greatly appreciated. Write to us at Les Feldick Ministries, 30706 West Lona Valley Road, Kinta, Oklahoma, 74552. Or call 1-800-369-7856. Remember, all programs are available in printed form, audio cassette, and videotape. Be sure to tune in next time to Through the Bible with Les Feldick.